Hey all. So I'm just going to jump right in and start going over a couple of things that uh, are in my mind at the moment. And I'm getting a lot of clients at the moment who are just unable to resist the allure of shitcoins. And I want to ask, if you're involved in Bitcoin, why are you involved in it? And do you really know why you're involved? And it's a good question to ask because if you're in it to make a lot of money, and to you, money is dollars in a bank account, you're missing the point in a big way. And I want to talk about that because I don't want to imply, I can't really think of a better way to say this than what is on offer here, what is on the table for every human on the planet is complete freedom of the likes we've never seen before. It's the most liberating technology I've ever come across, and it's more significant than any other technological development possibly that exists or has ever existed. We have, and it's such an insult that I don't even want to mention some of the things I have to constantly come up against and combat and debunk. I mean, I made a video on Ethereum, and I realized I missed out one major element of Ethereum's weaknesses when making that video, and it was something I'd like to address now, which is scalability. Bitcoin is a blockchain, but blockchains don't mean anything in and of themselves. All you're doing is hashing bits of data together and allowing anyone to download it. I mean, not even necessarily that, but it's just a way of structuring data and using cryptography to group parts of data together. But it doesn't mean anything in and of itself to do that. It just makes your database, it just means if you have a database or a record or a ledger of something that's happening, that occasionally you take bits of those data and combine them um, into one big chunk of data that is a mathematical output from putting all those bits of data in as an input. And then you take another chunk of data and mix in the previous mixture. That doesn't do anything in and of itself, because if there's one person maintaining that ledger, if you want to change something about some of the data from a long time ago, you just change it, and then you change everything after it. The cascade that happens when you change one piece of data in the past means everything has to be recalculated again from that point. But you can do that if you're a private company running a database. It doesn't matter whether you're hashing bits of the data in that database together. I hope that was clear, because that is the essence of why every shitcoin is a complete scam, and why there is billions and billions of dollars in an industry that people are completely obsessed with. The fact that they don't understand that one point I just made, which took me 30 seconds to explain, debunks the entire industry. There is no meaningful decentralization in any blockchain that exists apart from Bitcoin. And I want to go into why that is now. What Ethereum does, which is the best example of the opposite and wrong way to do it, is it says we're going to do that method. We're going to hash data together, and then when we get new lots of data, we include the old hash, which means there's a cascade if anyone wants to change any of the data from the past, which means all of the work needs to be redone from that point on. But when you do this in Bitcoin, Bitcoin runs on its blockchain a very, very simple and deliberately primitive app called Bitcoin, the currency. It's a very simple currency. It's a very basic, primitive app, and it's been kept that way deliberately because that means everyone can verify what it does, and everyone can participate in the verification process, and that provides a resilience to this coin. That means if someone wants to rewrite the history of Bitcoin, they have to disagree with a lot of people who have verified the history for themselves. Now, Ethereum doesn't care about that. It doesn't need a lot of people. It doesn't have any interest in lots of people running at the most primitive app possible that's been kept primitive solely for the purpose of we want anyone to be able to run this with as low resource requirements as possible. That's the opposite of Ethereum. Ethereum has said, we don't care about that. We want to go for sophistication. We want a blockchain that can handle incredibly sophisticated apps that can do all sorts of wonderful things. Like, no one's ever come up with an answer to why you'd want this, by the way. And every single platform that runs on Ethereum has been a scam, bar zero. But nonetheless, actually, I take that back. There's a couple of stable coins that interact with it, but they just use it as shitty middleware, and it's of no relevance to them whether they use Ethereum or anything else. But nonetheless, Ethereum doesn't care about that because it knows no one wants to take comfort in the fact that enough people are able to run the software and verify what's happening on the network. It doesn't need people to take comfort in that because people don't know that that is the requirement for having a decentralized platform like Bitcoin. If you want decentralization, you need a lot of people doing that thing. And Bitcoin has a lot of people doing that thing, and it's compromised every fancy feature and every bell and whistle along the way because it needs people to be able to run nodes. Every other cryptocurrency, even if they keep it simple, still just doesn't have enough people running nodes. And that means the network doesn't have the stretch and the broadness and the diversity that you need to make it resistant to attack. Now, what that creates is a cascading, to keep using that word, it creates a cascading effect where all of the people that require reliability and sound money and something that provides an alternative financial system, all of those people are brought to Bitcoin, and all of those people reinforce the network by being there. And then you have, by contrast, you have these scam coins that don't care about those qualities. And if you're interested, to bring it back to the very beginning of this video, if your purpose of buying some Bitcoin with your government money is to then sell it in the future for more government money, you're doing something which is tantamount to abuse, not just of Bitcoin, but of yourself, because you have found an exit to a system, a financial system of control and theft, and you've left it, and you've benefited from being outside it, and then you've chosen to return. And this is the equivalent of Cypher in the Matrix, who decides to go back into the Matrix because he can't be bothered with the real world and he wants to go back to living in the dreamland. And it's sad to watch. And fair enough if that's how you get started and you're attracted and you come for the gains, sure. But once you leave, I sound like I'm indoctrinating people into a cult and into a religion, and fair enough, there is some element of that to this because it's humans and it's money and there's basically faith involved in anything of that nature. And yes, Bitcoin does look like a pyramid scheme in the right light, and I agree with all this stuff, and it's, but the cult, if you were to describe it as a cult, the characteristics of that cult are complete personal responsibility and freedom. Cults don't tend to care about that. Cults tend to do the opposite, which is control people and restrict the behavior of the people there and limit the acceptable scope of what's thinkable and what isn't. Bitcoin is it's the anti-cult. It requires no buy-in to any sort of moral philosophy. It just requires an exit from the control that's placed on you by the financial systems you're forced to use. And as I've alluded to in other videos, especially my COVID 1984 video, there it is, my video's flagged now, but what I've alluded to in that video is the fact that small businesses have been ruined by lockdowns and restrictions placed on them by governments, and they've been screwed around with and opened and closed and opened and closed to the point where no one would be foolhardy enough to try and open a business, not until years have passed and there is a stable environment again. And what that means is that the share price of Amazon is skyrocketing, as well as every single online platform that replaces small businesses and high street stores. And firstly, as a brief aside, that means these companies can have more money available to lobby and to continue and pressure governments to continue lockdowns, even though they're demonstrably completely ineffective. When you look at Florida versus California, and, I mean, this is obvious. If you don't know this by now, you don't want to believe anything different at this point. You're a masochist, I believe. But forgetting all that, what this means is that all transactions increasingly are going to be online. And online transactions with traditional government money have to go through a lot of middlemen. There is no cash involved in that process. And if you're forced to use credit cards online or services like PayPal, you're going to find yourself with an ever-decreasing list of things that you're allowed to purchase. That is a reality that you're going to have to face, and you're going to have to confront the fact that your money is not your own, and there are too many middlemen in between the customer and the merchant in this system. The fact that you can use cash to buy from mom and pop stores at the moment, or at least up until this moment, has meant that certain freedoms have existed even when you use services that require PayPal and things like that. Now that those stores are basically gone, the ability to restrict financial freedom amongst people trying to operate in a normal capitalist society is now actually realistic. You can suddenly say to people, okay, you're not allowed to spend over $200 a day on food because it's unfair. Or you can start making these insane Soviet-era policies because it's actually realistic to do. A lot of what's legal and what's illegal is not reflective of what's moral and immoral, as much as it's reflective of what's enforceable and what isn't. And cannabis is a good example because it's so difficult to enforce the illegality of that it's just that's one of the factors in why basically everyone's just kind of given up, and why some laws are just, I mean, maybe that's not a very good example, but once you become able to police everyone financially to the point where the world becomes unrecognizable to what it is today. Like, I mean, when you buy something online, you always end up having to fill out your name and address, and if you're using your credit card for it, all that information is there anyway. Like, I mean, if you're booking a plane ticket, yeah, okay, someone's gonna know your passport, someone's gonna attach your finances with your identity at some point. But it has, up until now, been possible to go into a grocery store and buy some grapes and hand them $10 for it, and without having to leave your name and address and take a photo of yourself with the date on that photo. And, that's the requirement they place on a lot of online purchases. And if you want to buy Bitcoin, you have to send in multiple forms of ID to these exchanges, because governments come down hard on that stuff because they know that's the only route back out to freedom. And cash has basically been decreasingly useful because cash is not a practical thing to store anyway, because money has been devalued so much that if you want to have your savings and keep it in cash, then you have to keep so much cash that that becomes impractical, right? And not only that, the devaluation of it means that you need so much of it to buy anything significant that you're basically only going to use it for tiny purchases, unless you're your classic Scarface drug dealer kind of character where you have lots and lots of cash. But guess what? Those films were made in the 80s, and all of the other mob style films where people operate like that, they're all very old films. Stuff like that just isn't possible anymore. If you got millions of dollars in cash, you might as well light it on fire, because what the fuck can you do with it? You can't buy anything. You can't go and buy a house with cash, because that's a conspicuous purchase unless you can prove ownership, unless you can prove why you have that $1 million. The government's going to come after you, and you're going to be limited to small purchases with cash. And that means going out and eating in extravagant restaurants and enjoying yourself and paying for this, that, and the other. But you're not going to be able to fly around the world and enjoy this, and you're not going to be able to do that stuff unless you operate in some very shady circles. And, increasingly it becomes the point that $100 in cash is only worth about $30 or $40 in a bank account, which is clean money, because you can do what you want with that money, kind of, but the cash you're limited with your utility there. And then there's the fact that it's not Bitcoin. You can't back it up, and it can be stolen and it can be counterfeited, and you're not going to be able to verify that. All sorts of disadvantages there. So what are you looking at? You're looking at a world where you're going to wake up one day, and maybe you've already had that day, where you realize your money is something that is just so useless that your ability to use it to transact is just so limited that it just doesn't function as a medium of exchange anymore. And it's already useless as a store of value. We all know that. So what are you left with? You're left with the alleged third characteristic of money, which is unit of account. And it's a crap unit of account too. It's like everyone's trying to measure their height for something, but it turns out every 20 minutes, the length of a meter or a foot changes by about 10% or something, and it dropped by roughly 3% a year, but no one really knows, and it's a political decision, and that's not how you measure value. That's not what you do. So re-enter Bitcoin. Bitcoin is complete freedom again. Bitcoin means you can send money of any amount at any time to anyone, anywhere in the world, whenever you like, and there is no one in between you and the person buying, and there is no limit to it. It doesn't matter how small or how big the transaction is. It doesn't matter what time it is. It doesn't matter what country the person is in, and it doesn't matter what the nature of the purchase is, which means it's not like, oh, you're buying a house. Okay, well, there's a 20% tax on that. Oh, you're buying something we consider essential and don't tax. Okay, you can have that one. But by the way, what's the source of the funds and what's it, blah, blah, blah. No, if you're selling something and I have some Bitcoin, I can buy it from you. And, it has the same properties as cash in that regard, but cash is, like I mentioned, clunky and kind of useless at the moment in a way that Bitcoin isn't. Bitcoin still will get you in trouble if you buy, if you're a drug dealer and you buy a Ferrari with Bitcoin, yeah, you're going to have some problems probably with that, because you still need to insure the thing, and it's still going to exist in a system because driving is a very regulated thing. So it's not going to get you around all problems. But my original point with this cash discussion was the fact that you have been able to spend cash in mom and pop stores has meant that we have an understanding of finance that means it's between me, the customer, and you, the merchant. And sometimes arbitrary middlemen like Square or Visa will show up and facilitate things like online transactions and stuff. But in principle, it's my money and I can spend it on what I want, and you can sell me what you want and you can take my money directly from me. The fact that that is the general psychological understanding of how money works up until now means that you remain relatively unrestricted on the platforms where you have to deal with third parties in between you and the merchant. Those platforms, like I keep mentioning, Square and PayPal and Visa and MasterCard, as a result, don't do too much because it wouldn't be enforceable if they did try to create loads of limits on what you did. I've mentioned this before, but the only industry where you really feel the difference is cannabis. And any cannabis merchant, when they're dealing in the States and it's legal in their state, but it's not legal federally, and you have some sort of moral agenda by the credit card companies where you can't, at your dispensary, sell people cannabis because Visa doesn't like it, even though it's legal. And then you're stuck with cash and all the expenses of moving large quantities of cash around and having to hire security and stuff like that. And that's expensive, and you're paying a price for something which is being allegedly at the bottom of it, something being done apparently for your own good. Visa have decided this is a bad thing, and I'm not interested in advocating cannabis here or anything like that. Of course, my moral principles are you're an adult. You can put in your body whatever you like to put in your body. It's not Visa's job to tell you whether that's a good idea or not. But anyway, that's at the edge of what's doable and not doable with middlemen transactions, with transactions where middlemen have stuck themselves in between the merchant and the customer. But there aren't that many examples of that because, like I keep saying, the fact that cash exists and you can use it without any middlemen means that there's an expectation of that with all the transactions where you do use these middlemen. But to round this off, now we've entered a situation where cash is dead. Cash has been demonized for being able to spread COVID, which is an example of an agenda that has been present for a long time. Governments don't really like cash. They need it. They need it in order for there not to be a complete breakdown at the bottom end of society, because they need ghettos to be able to survive somehow. And there's usually those basic. There's a film called The House I Live In, which explains this well, where the entire way the prison system works in America, along with the very poorest people, and they're basically certain drugs have to remain illegal, and cash has to remain around in order for these to become sustainable. And the prisons need it because there's entire towns in America that just everyone in that town is either in the prison or works for the prison, and there's that. But with that one exception out of my mind, without notwithstanding, everything else, the government would much rather there were middlemen in every single transaction, because they can police those middlemen. And once that reaches a certain threshold, which I think is basically happening now, once every single thing you buy is from Amazon instead of going into town and buying it from a local store where you can pay cash, once that finally reaches a tipping point, which is basically where we are, you are not going to be able to transact in the way you understand transactions currently. And you're probably just going to feel like it was always that way, wasn't it? Because that's how it feels when liberties are taken from you. For example, we went from 10 years ago, I was worried about every single phone call and every single text message I make, and everything happen, every location I'm in, and every movement I make of my phone, with my phone being permanently stored and known by not only the company but various government entities. And that was a paranoid conspiracy theory. And then Edward Snowden came out with his leaks proving that that's what they did. And suddenly, and there was no, oh, I can't believe this, that's outrageous, or, oh, the conspiracy theorists were right. The only reaction I ever heard was, yeah, we already knew that, so who cares? I'm not that important anyway. And I don't get it, because it's denial and rejection and like writing it off as paranoia, and the second reaction is straight to, yeah, so what? We already knew that. That doesn't make any sense to me, because where's the middle bit? Where's the outrage? Where's the acknowledgement of the fact that these conspiracy theorists were completely right? So anyway, that's what's going to happen with finance. You're going to find yourself unable to do a transaction that isn't approved specifically by a money transmitting business, or however, a money service business, or whatever the acronym is in your jurisdiction. You're going to find yourself basically having to submit to the moral dictates of a bunch of banks, and who are doing the bidding of a government. And that is not that is not something you want to go for. And Bitcoin is the way out of that. And there are canaries in the coal mine, and you don't want to sleepwalk into something like this and be too late. Because back to the very, very original, my original purpose for making this video, I wanted to talk about how, when you consider these things and the implications of something like Bitcoin being around, it really is an insult and an embarrassment for you to buy it, watch it go up from $20,000 to $30,000, and then sell it again. And there is a minor contribution you're making there, but I don't want to give you a you should or any sort of prescription here. I'm just saying something more along the lines of, why would you run back to that system once you've experienced life on the outside of that? I saw one of those poignant memes the other day, not a humorous one, but it's a picture with two lions, and it's a picture of like a circus lion in a cage and just another lion in a plain in Africa. and it says, which lion would you rather be? The one on the left has free healthcare, guaranteed food, guaranteed shelter, dental care, everything you could possibly want. Which one would you rather be? And I've never seen such a beautifully put and simply put argument for why freedom is just obviously better than anything you're promised in return for your freedom. And all of the convenience in the world is not worth your freedom. All of the health in the world is not worth your freedom. And like with COVID, it's particularly painful because this is not a very dangerous disease at all. But if COVID was flying HIV and Ebola and brain cancer all mixed into one, I still wouldn't accept the erosion of our freedoms. And I wouldn't even need to in that circumstance anyway, because people would voluntarily not want to spread it, rather than walk around with a disease they barely see any evidence of and have to comply with rules that are very, very destructive to their lives. But anyway, in reference to that meme, I'm saying, if you want to be the lion in Africa, if you want to be the one that has to find your own food and the one that has to not break your leg because you're not going to be able to heal that leg yourself, or the one that has to find its own shelter, if you want to be that lion, then if you don't want to be that, then in my opinion, you were never capable of leaving home. You need someone to look after you and care for you, and that's fine. But these entities like banks and governments don't care about you the way your parents cared about you. Your parents are not cognate to life outside in the real world. And Bitcoin is life in the real world. It's you saying, if I pay for this, then they have my money. I can't go, I don't like this anymore. I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna request a refund via Amazon. And Amazon are going to give me that money straight away because they still have it. They never gave it to the merchant. The merchant would have to wait months to receive that money. Amazon, I mean, maybe not if you're buying directly from Amazon, but I'm talking if you're buying from a third party through one of these middlemen. And what that says to me is that you can now exercise way poorer judgment about whether you buy this thing or not. When you spend Bitcoin on something, you are 100% certain that you want that thing. And that means a lot of purchases just aren't going to get made. And that's fine, because what that means is people are taking personal responsibility. And on the flip side of that, if you buy something and it does turn out to be defective and you bought with Bitcoin, you still have feedback and reputation. You can still contact whoever sold it to you and say, look, this doesn't work. I want my Bitcoin back. And they can give it to you back, but they are not forced to. Everything about that is voluntary. And voluntary interactions, that is how you make the world go round, and you make everyone have a smile on their face, not because they're forced to have that smile on their face, not because they're busy saying how awesome the government is because they're going to get shot if they don't say that. You're in a situation where people are actually prospering, and free trade, and it gets a bad rap, but capitalism is miraculous, and for all its failures, any situation or any structure that tries to stand in the way of that and create something superior to capitalism, whereby you say, okay, people aren't allowed to freely trade and no one's allowed to own stuff anymore. Like, any time you do that, you're allowing someone who isn't your parents, but is someone who's been elected or someone who has gained a lot of power through whatever means to have a bunch of control over you. And of course, they will always do it under the guise of it's for your own good. Of course, it will always come from that. But how do you know it is? Sometimes when you're in your teens, your parents will be saying, you need to do this, you need to do that. And you'll be thinking, I actually don't think that's a good idea. And they're your parents. And sometimes they're wrong. But what about your prime minister? What about your president? How much does he know? How much does he even care about it? I mean, how much? This is 2021 now. I had to check. I grew up in the 90s, and anyone has been rolling their eyes and been brutally cynical for my entire life with regards to every institution there is, whether it's cinema, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's politics, whether it's finance. Everyone, when you refer to anything here, you just expect to get fucked over. That is the expectation. There is no pride when it comes to this stuff anymore. And it's almost the only situation where you don't see that anymore was America, and it always seemed like a very childish approach. Like, people proud of their country, patriotic. How backward, how racist. What do they hate foreigners? Like, fuck me. What a shitty state of things for that to be just the general thing. And for me, it's always been reflected in the popular art, like, if you can call it that. But I mean, The Simpsons was perfect for just the most successful show, one of the most successful shows of the whole decade of the 90s. I mean, we don't talk about what it became after that, but one of the most successful shows, and it is just reeking of cynicism. Everything in it is cynical and distrustful of institutions, because that is how we define our time. But it wasn't always like that. Politics is always a dirty business for sure, but there are genuine businesses that are formed of someone who loves what they do and wants to share it with the world. I have my business. I like Bitcoin. I love Bitcoin. I want to share it with the world. People pay me to educate them about it. I'm not doing this for the money, but I love doing it. It's my passion. And when you want to hire me, if you come at it with an approach of, oh, what's in it for him? He's only doing it for this. He's only doing it for that. Then it's sad, but that I would understand that, because that's the zeitgeist. That is how everything feels. When you vote for a politician, you come with the assumption of they're lying, whatever, they're full of shit. And if you don't come with that, then you're wrong usually. So you'd be forgiven for having that attitude. But my point is, not everyone's like that. There are some people that love what they do. Many people love what they do, and they want to earn money doing it because they want to be able to make the world go round. They want to participate. They want to spend that money and interact financially with other people who love what they do. And it's fantastic. Like, someone can be an expert and love the human body and know so much about muscles and bones, and you can have a problem and they can sort it out for you, and they can spend their time doing that because you give them money for it. And when you give them that money, they can go and find someone who is an absolute master fisherman or an absolute master contractor who can build them something in their garden, and you know, they use that thing in their garden to build a table, and then they can massage people from there. And you know, I mean, this stuff is miraculous. It really is. It means you can do what you love without having to learn and be a jack of all trades. You can contract that out. You can get other people. You can delegate. Other people can do the stuff you don't want to do or you don't like, and you can pay them for it, and they can pay you back. And that is a system that lifts everyone up, and it does. Every year, millions are lifted out of poverty. Millions start having access to tap water, to basic transportation. We are improving and improving and improving, and there's so many people that are trying to scare you about the future with environmentalism, with population. Oh, population's out of control. It's not. Nearly every country in the world is in a natural decrease, not a natural increase. The only exception, I think, is India and some of Africa, and it doesn't last long. I think we're expected. More reasonable estimates tell us we're going to peter out at about 15 billion. The world can handle that just fine. And I don't like initiatives that discourage reproduction, because a few generations of that and you don't have any more generations because there aren't any more kids. And if societies don't revolve around the importance of having families and reproducing, then kids get a real bad childhood, and then you have a really shitty generation after that of struggling adults that weren't given the childhood they needed because the culture they grew up in didn't cherish the family and demonized it. This isn't me. I'm not saying we can go back to 1950. We can't, but what are you doing unless we're heading towards a new re-acknowledgement of the fact that parenthood and childhood and the family and all of these things are sacred, and if you don't want to participate in it, you don't need to, but you shouldn't demonize these things because you had a childhood and you needed a culture that respected that. You need these things. And like, I've gone off on I apologize for the tangent and the rant there. I mean, what I'm really saying is what you have in 1950s America when it comes to the pride and the love of the country and the relatively free market capitalism, you have basically one of the best cultures that ever was around. And I don't want to hear about all of the things that are wrong with it, because there's always going to be shit you can find. Nothing is perfect. But I'm also not advocating, I'm not doing an Ann Coulter. I'm not advocating returning to that, because it would be a waste of time, because you can't. Things have changed. Institutions have completely rotten from the inside out and been plundered, along with the middle class, and money has been destroyed. But we've been led to believe certain things. And when you get involved in the Bitcoin world, you realize you don't need to believe those things, because you're not technologically limited to those things being true anymore. For example, it's like with the phone surveillance example I gave earlier. People use phones now not with the expectation of privacy, but with the expectation of everything I do here is getting tracked and monitored, and I'm going to do it anyway because there's no technological alternative for me. So I submit to the control I'm under. My phone network, whether it's AT&T or O2 or Orange or whatever, they are going to keep a log of every single movement I make. They're going to store permanently the time and the content of every phone call and every text message I make, and every website I visit. If I'm stupid enough not to be using a VPN, they're going to log everything I do. They're going to know every request I make, they are going to store it all, and I have no expectation of privacy, because that's the world and that's what everyone else does. And I don't want to not take part in that. I want to still be able to function as a human, and that's how humans function now. And you can be a mountain man and walk away from it and not use these technological devices, or you can find the technological alternatives that don't do that to you. And if those don't exist, you're not going to be able to do that. But there comes a situation where it's like, what's right and what's wrong gives way to what's practical and what isn't. And that's the thing. Without Bitcoin, it's not going to be practical to have freedom of association and finance, and as we know it, and capitalism as we know it, and all the miracles of that will be gone. And you will understand what it's like to live in the Soviet bloc. You will understand that, because when there's a lot of red tape around stuff, the incentive to produce goods and services for people is gone, and the government loves that, because then it falls to them to do it, and then that's more control. But when that incentive is gone, then you're going to find that there are just less of that product. And when there's less of that product, that means it's more expensive to get. And you're going to find, you need someone to make that bread for you. You need someone who loves and makes a lot of business and maintains a reputation for being the best manufacturer of refrigerators around. This is all stuff that you can take for granted, and you can, ironically, the people that really are pushing to destroy capitalism in the West are the people that have never even put 1 minute's thought into the fact that they have food and shelter and phones and telephony in general, and all of the infrastructure that makes their life livable and wonderful, and makes them, even the supply chains that are maintained for medicine and all of these things that just are taken so for granted. They will advocate for systems that don't allow for any of the incentives that make that stuff reliable. Without Bitcoin, you're going to walk away from all of these good things. And the world is going in that direction. And Bitcoin is the arc. There is a flood of insane government overreach that is reaching a point now where you're not going to be able to escape it if you're not careful. And being careful in this sense means doing one of the most powerful things you can do, which is having your own money under your own control. And now, I'd very quickly like to segue into another quality of Bitcoin, where I again consider it just an insult to sit around all day looking at the price. I mean, we all do it. We all spend all day looking at the price. We love it. We can't resist it. But it's irrelevant to what Bitcoin is, because what Bitcoin is fundamentally limited to 21 million. There are 21 million Bitcoins. That's it. There's never going to be any more than that. Most of them have been mined already. There's a few left to be mined. 2 million or so. But you can own a small part of that. And tracking what that small part is worth in useless dollars, soon to be useless dollars, that will be usable in the most limited of financial situations ever. To track it in that is to miss the point. Here's how many Bitcoin there are. Here's how many of those Bitcoin you own. That's good. That's better. That's worse. Get some Bitcoin. Make sure you own as much as you possibly can, and make sure you keep it safe, and don't ever return to the system where you're not going to be able to freely transact with people, because you need to be able to freely transact in order to have the things you need to have for yourself and your family. Bitcoin is there for you. It's the ark away from the flood of government corruption and debasement and theft through inflation and taxation, and there is every single reason in the world for you to get involved in this, and it demonstrates such a poor understanding of what's on offer to you if you're looking at the price today and saying, is it going to go up a bit more tomorrow? That stops being relevant after a while. Once you've gone through cycle after cycle after cycle of just, you buy some Bitcoin because you believe in it, and then it goes up by 1,000 times in value, and it goes down a bunch after that, and you're like, shit, I should have sold. But you never do, and you hold on to it, and you hold on to it, and then eventually it reaches that 1,000 times it was previously, and you know it's not stopping there, and it goes up a lot more than that, and then peaks out again when the media starts, printing clickbait about it, and your idiot uncle is calling you, how do I buy Bitcoin? And you sort them out, and they lose their private keys, or they make whatever mistake they make, or maybe they go down the rabbit hole and they have a great time, and they become a proper Bitcoiner. But most people don't realize what they've got, and most people are taking for granted a lot of things at the moment. And I still hear every day people saying, "Oh, when it's back to normal, we'll do this. When we're allowed to fly again, when we're allowed out of our house, guys, that is not coming back to normal. That's never ever coming back until there is mass civil disobedience and mass refusal to wear masks and obey pointless, ineffective, counterproductive lockdowns. They are never ever going to take that stuff back. This was a 2-week thing to stomp the curve. And we all know that it's ineffective. The way to get rid of COVID is everyone has to get COVID, or most people have to get COVID, because then it stops being able to spread because most people are immune. That's how we've dealt with every cold and flu in the past before, give or take. Yeah, there's a bit more sophistication in it than that. Every time you do a lockdown, you slow the development of herd immunity and you cripple your own economy in the process. All that we should have done was protect the vulnerable and let the economy keep going as normal. And COVID would have petered out long ago. It would have petered out in late spring, early summer of 2020. Now we have the European authorities saying now there's a new variant in the UK. Who didn't see that coming? And that's going to carry on. And they're saying they want to extend lockdowns till July of 2021. Are you serious? This thing is not going to stop until people start losing their fucking minds. And I just can't believe I'm still hearing people say, oh, when it goes back to normal, when everyone's vaccinated, when they've already flat out said, even if you're vaccinated, you still must wear masks and still must obey lockdowns and still must adhere to curfews. And dude, this is an insane power trip that's got nothing to do with health or rationality. It's just ridiculous. And the point is, none of this stuff is coming back. None of these freedoms are coming back. There is a freedom you can take right now, and it's one of the most, it allows sovereignty in a way that is truly fantastic and beautiful, and it's called Bitcoin, and you can buy this thing and you can hold it, and it will preserve one of the most, okay, you're banned from freely associating. You're not allowed to spend time with other people. You have to do it all online. You're banned from, you're banned, you're banned from free speech on basically pretty much any platform, and I mean that is what it is. I mean, that's a shame. I mean, people chose to use centralized platforms. Decentralized platforms are a pain in the ass. I get that, but my COVID video gets labeled. Find out the facts about COVID. Someone at YouTube is disagreeing with the video I made on COVID. They want to present the right information on that in case I presented the wrong information. This is total bullshit. Do not fall for this stuff. There are like 5 companies running everything. All modern human discourse now is increasingly not, again, just like finance. All modern telephony is happening through centralized third parties like Facebook, like Amazon, sorry, not Amazon because that's a marketplace, but I'm talking about all the social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat, and all of these platforms can overnight turn around and iMessage, like WhatsApp, like all of these platforms can turn around and say, we don't like what you're saying, so you're not able to use our platform anymore. Boom, gone. That's not, and that combine that with okay, I can just make a new Facebook account. Who gives a shit? Yeah, how long is that going to be an option for? They want to make digital identities in order to track who's had COVID vaccinations and who hasn't, and how it's going to take 10 minutes for that to be used by these social media platforms for, you can't have a Facebook account unless you upload your digital ID to us. This will happen, guys. This can happen very, very quickly. This can happen. This is turnkey. We can have this year, if not within a few months. That is waiting to happen. And at that point, you can be deplatformed in 5 minutes. And guess what? If you're still not allowed to freely associate, if you can't go and meet your friend and talk to them person to person without the police somehow being called by your neighbors, then, it turns out I can't talk to anyone anymore, because any of the platforms that people actually use to communicate are all under strict control, and I can't participate in them unless I adhere to a system, and that system is basically a prison now. So it's basically stay in prison or be outside prison, but there is no one else there. And if you try and interact with other human beings in the way that you normally would, you will end up in a different kind of prison where you are forced out of the voluntary prison everyone else has made for themselves. I mean, this is, I'm using prison in 2 different contexts there as an analogy, but one is more of a walled garden and one's a prison. So you'll have all the allowable communication and all of the allowable financial interaction that happens through PayPal and all these middlemen. And so the ability to speak and the ability to associate and the ability to transact, all of those will entirely be done through third parties. And it will be okay in an ever decreasing amount to be a part of those systems. Sure, okay, not so bad, but I mean, it's like, I call it the walled garden. I mean, it's not my term, of course, but it's a commonly used phrase. But you're inside there, you have the abilities you have. Oh, we're not allowed to do that anymore. Okay, I'm not allowed to buy over 8 grams of cannabis this month than I was last month. I'll just obey it, whatever. Okay. I'm sorry to come up with a poor example like that. One I think that will be vilified very soon is meat. I think they're going to come after meat eaters and carnivores very soon, because they're an easy group to attack. They're just farmers. They don't have a lot of clout. Whereas when you go after poisonous bullshit like soy and corn byproducts and things that are just basically, industrial byproducts and waste that gets pushed into everything that there is, and you can't really eat anything without eating this bullshit. Those are huge industries, and they will never outlaw that, but they will. I mean, the World Economic Forum recently came out with an updated food pyramid. Eggs aren't on it and red meat isn't on it. Are you serious? They are 2 of the most nutritious foods that are out there. And what is on there? Endless grain and inflammatory foods and horrible stuff that is just, that humans are not fundamentally supposed to be eating. I'm not going to go full carnivore here, but meat is good for you, and humans have a digestive tract that is pretty well adapted to eating meat. And I'm not, if you don't do well with meat and you find yourself doing better with veggies, sure, but if you're on a moral crusade now to make it illegal for me to eat meat, that's coming. And that's one of the elements of control I think is right around the border. And because there's it's a moral crusade, like, oh, it's animal cruelty and all this. Like, the minute there's a moral imperative there, and the technological and the way society has been set up allows a control in there suddenly, then it becomes realistic. Like, if you cannot go into a butcher and give them cash for beef, instead you have to buy through a financial middleman, and that financial middleman is PayPal, and they operate countrywide, and the government can say to them one day, you're not allowed to transact meat anymore. They can just turn it off with a flick of a switch. Okay, no one can buy meat anymore. It's that simple. At the moment, it would require finding every butcher and every farmer and shutting them down, and that's not possible because the meat industry is somewhat decentralized. But if the financial element of it becomes centralized completely, then all of these switches become something you can flick on and off instantly. I mean, it's crazy, and that's so. I mean, to continue on with the slightly wider point I was making, if anyone is still listening at this point, your freedom to associate and your freedom to transact and your freedom to speak and all of these things depend on certain status quo things that have basically gone now. And as a result of that, all of the things that are familiar to you will be gone, and those things were good and righteous and entirely justifiable, and they are now gone. But out of the three of them, I think they are. I wouldn't try to rank them in importance: the freedom to associate, the freedom to speak, and the freedom to transact. I don't want to place a hierarchy there, but I can easily see that the freedom to transact is the most important one, because Andreas is the first to make that point. I mean, that when you buy and spend, when you use money, it's a form of speech, and it's the way we communicate value to one another, and it's an important thing to be able to do. And there is so much more to it than that one point, but the freedom to transact is the freedom to have. It's the freedom to live in the West as we've known it, and not to live in fucking China or North Korea or the USSR or any of these awful, awful dystopian nightmares where everyone is walking around with a smile on their face because they don't want to have, their balance in their government printed digital wallet slashed, punished for. I mean, we've all seen Black Mirror. Most people haven't read their Orwell, but most people have watched Black Mirror. You've seen the episode where the girl has to walk around with an app, and every interaction you have with any other human, you have to rate them after that interaction, and it's a 5-star system, like user reviews generally are. And if you want to live in certain parts of town, in certain nice houses, if you want to drive certain cars, you have to have a rating of 4.6 stars or 4.7 stars. And if it falls below, suddenly you can't do that stuff. What does that mean? It means a society where everyone's walking around being fantastically pleasant and agreeable with one another, because everyone doesn't want to lose. Everyone doesn't want to lose out on that. So, and in a society like that, criticism of governments becomes impossible. And America is the opposite of that, because all anyone does with their freedom is shit on Donald Trump and hate and hate and hate someone who was actually elected, and they think he's a fascist and a Nazi and all that. And I'm like, do you not understand the point that if he was, you wouldn't be able to say any of this stuff? The whole point is America was a thriving democracy, because everyone was free to spend all day on Twitter complaining about Donald Trump. You can't do that in China. What's his name? Jack Ma has just disappeared. Jack Ma runs. What's the name of the? I'm just looking here. I mean, he runs one of the biggest one of the biggest businesses in China. He's the equivalent of Zuckerberg in China, or Jeff Bezos or something like that. Huge deal. Said something critical about the government, and he's disappeared, and no one's seen him in 2 months. I don't fucking want to live in that sort of culture. No thanks. And the way and everyone in China is like, yeah, okay, I'll just sort of assume he did do something wrong. Like, because that's a comfortable realization. You want to believe that if you can act okay, that you're not going to have someone come after you. Like, in the West, it's, okay, look, I'm going to walk around and I'm going to be indignant if a policeman stops me and wastes hours of my time for no good reason. I'm going to be indignant about that. I'm not going to expect to be able to get away with it, though, if I shoot someone or commit something like a violent act or do something that's obviously like outside the bounds of what's, normal. I mean, you can argue that, like, I'm not going to go full libertarian because I think it's a bit stupid and, like, it's morally defensible, but it's not realistic. And, like, maybe a lot of Bitcoiners are going to have a problem with me saying that. But, like, if I generally stay within what I consider to be, like, civilized behavior, apologies for the dropout there. If I stay within the bounds of what I consider to be moral behavior within the West, I can expect a policeman not really to waste much of my time and to generally be respectful of me and to treat me like with a fair amount of dignity. I don't need to worry that if the cop doesn't like me, they're going to do something nasty and I'm going to have my organs harvested, because that's the situation in China. And fuck these guys. And I will say it over and over again in every one of my videos. Fuck the Chinese Communist Party. I don't want to live like that. And I'm genuinely scared about these people. They have fingers in every single pie in every institution in the West. And there is an apologism and a revisionism that goes on, and a tolerance for the actions of this regime that I find completely unacceptable. And I've seen people with hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter who are respectable in America saying Trump is awful, blah blah blah. Trump is this, he's that, he's so bad. China, on the other hand, are completely transparent. They've done such good things. Their response to COVID was so much more effective than Trump's. Are you fucking serious? Are you absolutely serious? Like, the level on which people are saying these things, they are advocating mass genocide. They are advocating ethnic cleansing. They are apologizing for slaughter, like black market organ harvesting. All of this just foul behavior. But what is the main hallmark of it, I find, is just the fact that everyone has to walk around with a smile on their face in these cultures because they don't want to get ruined by a system that will chew them up and spit them out. And that's the system you come when you're to bring this whole thing back round. And hopefully I'm like right back to the beginning point now. To bring this whole thing back to what I'm discussing, once you have these arbitrary middlemen and these centralized points of control that exist between you and everyone you interact with, whether it's, oh, we can't hang out face to face, we got to do it through Zoom, who, by the way, are a Chinese company pretending to be encrypted, and they're not. So if you're meeting your therapist or your accountant or whoever through Zoom, they're totally violating confidentiality doing that, and no one seems to care about this. But anyway, back to the point. If your freedom of association is now, yeah, I'm free to associate, it's just I only ever do it through Zoom or Skype or WeChat or whatever. Your freedom to associate isn't real, and the fact that you're not free is something that you will become aware of if you're not currently aware of it. Your freedom to transact with other people, if the only time you ever transact is through PayPal or any other financial middleman, then again, you're not freely transacting. You just won't realize it until PayPal tell you you're not allowed to do something that you wanted to do, and it was something you used to be able to do with cash for no problem. And lastly, if your freedom to speak is only ever exercised on Twitter or Reddit or Facebook, these platforms have strict moderation policies that have started with some incredible amount of crackdown on what is acceptable and what is not acceptable to say. And if you haven't, the water's boiling, frogs. If you haven't realized that your freedom of speech is not, you do not have freedom of speech online on any of the centralized platforms. Of course you do if you use the internet properly, but who does that? Then if you realize your freedom, oh, I forgot one of the most essential freedoms there are. For the freedom of movement. You're now under de facto house arrest. You're not allowed to go out, and you're increasingly having to explain the purpose of your movement. Your freedom of movement's gone. Your freedom of speech is gone because you're only ever exercising it online, which means it's now an illusion. It's not a real freedom. Your freedom to transact is exactly the same illusion as the freedom of speech. What it is with Bitcoin is there was never a social media platform that could replace Twitter or Facebook or MySpace or anything that was with the resource requirements low enough that everyone could kind of run it, and it could be a decentralized network and practical and scalable and all that. That was never done. The only time we've ever managed to make a really effective and resilient decentralized network is through certain old things that are kind of a bit weird to describe in that way, and I usually talk about languages like that, but I mean, like English is a decentralized network of sorts, and it's maintained and preserved by all of the English speakers in the world, and if you want to change any element of it, you kind of have to force every English speaker to change the way they speak English, and that's an impractical thing to do, so it doesn't happen, but the language does sort of change at the same time, and if there's and consent kind of forms, but I'm saying we haven't really done anything that enshrines individual sovereignty and liberty like Bitcoin does, I think, ever in the history of humanity. And here it is, and it's staring you in the face. And to bring it right back to the beginning of this video, if you're coming to me and you've got $15,000, and if I buy it here, will it be worth this much in 3 months? The answer is, I don't know, probably, and it'll probably be worth a lot more than that. And the reason I have the confidence in that is because I understand it on a deeper level, and I wish you understood it on a deeper level too, because if you did, you wouldn't care about it being worth $30,000 in a couple of months. You would just want to keep it for the long term and for your children, and you would want to stake in the free world that Bitcoin offers you, and you would never want to return. And I'm telling you that if I can come up with a random example of how finances might look for your average Westerner right now, your average European, your average Canadian, you're probably getting handed a bunch of money from the government at the moment. And it's going to be a few $100 or a few $1,000 over the course of weeks or months. And I don't know what your bills look like. I don't know what your debt looks like. And of course, I'm not giving financial advice. I'm just describing a scenario here. If you buy some Bitcoin with that, and it becomes worth hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in 10 years or something like that, that's a very, very realistic scenario. I'm sure it's what's going to happen, and it doesn't make sense to look at it as being worth millions of dollars. If you put in $100 and it's worth $1 million in 10 years, what that means is that $1 million is nothing anymore, and no one uses it as a unit of account. That's coming, and that's inevitable, but for the purposes of this argument, if I can say if you bought $100 of Bitcoin today, and that amount of Bitcoin bought you what millions of dollars would buy you today in 10 years, that's more what I'm saying. Because if that situation was to come to pass, the millions of dollars would buy you absolutely nothing in that circumstance, because they'd be as good as Zimbabwe dollars, in which hundreds of trillions don't buy you a loaf of bread. That's all coming. Hyperinflation is coming. If you can be involved in that system, my main point I wanted to make to round off this video is, if you have that and you suddenly have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of purchasing power in today's terms, what are you doing with that money? Because if you ever gave me that much money, all I would do with it would be buy Bitcoin, because I don't know what to do with that. You can do, I'm not discouraging engaging in philanthropy or community or even straight up indulgence and making your house a beautiful paradise or any of these things. I'm just saying there's nothing wrong with having a savings account, and you've had it kicked out of you for your whole life. This idea of Bitcoin, there's a meme emerging in the Bitcoin community lately, which is Bitcoin is not an investment, it's a savings account. And that's maybe, if I can round off the video with that, but that would be the best point I'm really making in this video. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's no shame in that. You don't need to spend money straight away. You can keep it, and and it will be worth more in the future. And I think you should. And I don't think, if you're investing what you have now, and it's not that much, and it doesn't change your life, what you have right now, but you put it into Bitcoin, and then it's suddenly worth hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in purchasing power in today's terms, why sell? Sell what you need, live how you need to live, and keep what you can, and enjoy it for the freedom it offers you, and remain defiant and committed to this project, because it's a good thing for humanity, and it is providing an arc that means we can all enjoy financial liberty, even if we don't have liberty of movement or liberty of speech, or what was the other thing? Can't remember right now. But these are just wonderful things, and Bitcoin it gives you what it gives you. And if I'm gonna hurt myself mentioning shitcoins one more time, shitcoins don't do this. They don't provide you a stake in a fundamentally limited landscape of financial freedom that only has so much room in it that everyone can be a part of, but how big of a part you want to be in it is your choice. That's the future. There is it's not about a country or a place to become free from this government control. It's about a technological understanding and a freedom to think the way you want to think, and a freedom from prescribed thought. And Bitcoin is the exit, and it's the way to get out there, and it's the way to enjoy. It's the way to enjoy life as life should be enjoyed, and with dignity. And dignity is the point. And having a savings account is a dignified thing to do. And living paycheck to paycheck, and being on the debt treadmill, and basically having the dream that everyone has, which is, I'm going to buy a house and get a mortgage and pay off that mortgage and kill myself to pay off that mortgage, and then I own my own house. Yay! That's the ultimate fantasy. It's like, think bigger than that, guys. That's nothing. And that's, again, real estate is another thing where everything there's a middleman between you. You've got your realtors, you've got your governments with the taxations, you've got insurance companies, you've got to deal with mortgages, you've got to deal with all this bullshit, you've got to deal with bylaws. Oh, I want to build a deck. You're not allowed to build that. It's over 3 feet. It's not, if your driveway is this big, your deck can't be any bigger than that. It's not yours. Again, it's not yours. You need somewhere to live, so fair enough, but owning land, yes, land is a fundamentally scarce resource, but it's been carved up by provinces and jurisdictions to the point where you can't do what you want with that land, and your in and out fees are insane. Whereas Bitcoin, you buy it, you pay a fee to the exchange, but that's it. On the way out, you get taxed, sure, but watch my other video on taxes. Do as best you can, own as much as you can, and be in it for the right reasons, guys, and participate in the network. Because if you think Bitcoin can be improved, you can be the one that improves it. Because if everyone agrees with you, they will go along with your improvement, and the network will slowly change. But if you do anything that degrades those values of freedom that Bitcoin has enshrined into it, you will always be on your own with that, because everyone participating in this network wants its freedom, and no one has the infrastructure to control it. Occasionally you get the centralized choke points of Bitcoin, which are the exchanges or maybe some of the wallet providers, I don't know, but sometimes these guys will be like, okay, we're going to make a negative change in Bitcoin. We're going to increase this, or we're going to increase, start making blacklists and things like that. Or every time they try to do that, they fail because the entire network doesn't want them, and the network will always reject these. But it's interesting to see where those changes are initiated. They're always in the centralized choke points. So if it becomes illegal to use, Twitch just made it illegal to, sorry, it was the end of the video, but I've suddenly realized there's a bunch more points I want to make. Twitch, the world's biggest streaming platform, run by Amazon no less, has made it illegal to use the words virgin or incel, and I think there was one other word they made illegal as well. That's the point. Only they can do it because they're a centralized choke point of communication. Because billions of words are moving around on Twitch every day as people are typing into the chat and communicating with each other and whoever's streaming. Okay, they're a choke point. What happens when all your communication is done online? Do words get deleted? Do words suddenly lose their meaning? How Orwellian can you get? What happens when there's no words left except good and ungood and plus good and double plus good and all of these Orwellian terms? What happens when they delete the word revolution from all of these platforms and you can't, hey, we need a revolution. And when you send that message on Facebook Messenger, it just says, hey, we need a... It deleted the word revolution. And after a few years, no one remembers what that word even means anyway. When you remove these words, you remove people's ability to conceive of certain events and resist and do anything. And again, like Bitcoin is providing something there where stuff can't be removed. But I mean, I'm saying what I'm saying with that is the centralized choke points of certain freedoms we enjoy and certain liberties we enjoy are where attacks will come. So when there's an attack on the English language, like what Twitch just did, that's how you do it. Like I can say, oh, my family, and like, you know, maybe I run a school and I can say, okay, we're not allowed to use the word virgin in this school anymore or something like that. Sure, but it's not. I don't know why it keeps dropping out. I'm saying it's not effective as a form of as a choke point. Twitch is quite effective. Like maybe it's the Streisand effect. What Twitch have done by banning those words. Now everyone's going to invent euphemisms for them and have lots of fun doing it. Like when they banned the N word, everyone started. There's a country called Niger or Niger. You know, everyone just started using that instead, and it's like, okay, go ahead, ban the country in Africa now, yay! And people just have fun with it, you know. And so it's ineffective on that level, especially the Streisand effect, meaning it draws more attention to those words, and now every single person is using those words like as often as possible. And that just becomes funny, right? And it becomes a failed social justice policy that just makes a mockery of itself from the beginning. But my point remains, the attacks on certain freedoms will come from centralized choke points. And if like a significant percentage of all human communication is running through centralized platforms that decide certain words aren't okay, then those words will get deleted from the English language. If the percentage is significant enough. As long as you have the ability to meet people and talk to them freely, that's different. Then it will remain ineffective. But if all communication is done through a centralized internet platform, then you best believe that words are going to start getting invented and deleted. And when all financial activity is flowing through centralized middlemen as well, then you best believe that a bunch of financial activity is going to get made illegal that's currently totally legal because it's just impractical to make it illegal at the moment. So that's all coming. Bitcoin is just, it's like Bitcoin gives you what freedom of speech gives you. It's like if you'd always been using, Facebook Messenger, and Facebook Messenger hadn't banned so many words. It banned the word boy and girl because it's discriminatory to non-binary people. It banned, it's like if it just went insane like that, and then suddenly you realize there's this new technology where I can walk up to a guy in the street and start talking to him and say whatever I want, and he can say whatever he wants back. Imagine that. Imagine like discovering that, and imagine that not being the norm. That's what Bitcoin feels like when you get involved in it. And I don't give a fuck what the price is today and what it will be in the future. And because I can do that. It's like, hey, there's this fucking guy in India who made a video that was hilarious, and and I want him to keep making videos. And he's got a Bitcoin address, so I just send him some Bitcoin. And that Bitcoin address he made, he knows is tied to that video, by the way, because you can make an address for any purpose and an infinite amount of addresses, essentially. So he's like, oh, that video I made with that Bitcoin address on the bottom of it, I've received like $1,000 for that. I'm going to make more videos like that. How instant and direct is the relationship between the vendor and the content creators and consumers? Like, that's just beautiful. Like, whereas, what else am I going to do? Send him a message through a centralized platform saying, hey, what's your PayPal? And then he's like, yeah, okay, I've made a PayPal because I did a meme that took off and you can donate to it here. And then PayPal go, what's the purpose of your business for making this account, by the way? We don't like it. Or maybe, okay, we like it, fine, we'll allow people to donate to you. We charge 7% for that, by the way, and every time you get a donation, we sit on it for 6 months. And by the way, if anyone complains about any of your content or says it's racist or sexist or anything like that, we are going to not give you any of that money at all, and we're going to close your account with your money in it. So, I mean, that's already reality for people that buy and sell stuff using PayPal. Like, I mean, so for these people, when they discover Bitcoin, it's not the consumers that really feel it in the West, it's the merchants, because you're sick of selling stuff and having middlemen sit on your money for ages, charge you. I mean, American Express charges like 7-8%, and the merchants pay for it, but then you pay for it because you're paying more for the product in the first place. Come on, man. There's a system that, I don't want to sound like Joe Biden, but there's a fucking escape from all this. Get away from it. And once you're in Bitcoin, it really is as, I'm glad I came up with that analogy where it's like if you were always speaking over centralized platforms and go, it's like you can't type. You have to click on words to make sentences. And if there's a word you want to make, you can't click on it because it's not there. Or if there's a word that they don't like anymore, like virgin or incel, this is not there to click on. So the ability to communicate goes. And then, yeah, you discover someone in the street. Like, I discovered this new device called a telephone where I can phone them and use my mouth to make the letters and to describe the... It's hilarious, like, but it's that significant. So, and then you have all the added things, which is like, supposing words were constantly denatured by these centralized platforms all the time. So you could click on the words and most of them were there, but the words just kept changing meaning all the time. That's what's happening with your money, because... here, $100 means I can buy a car. Except it doesn't mean that anymore because money has changed as a way of communicating value to be much less effective. So now $100 buys me my weekly groceries, if that. It doesn't buy me a nice car because it only goes in one direction at least. It's consistent in that regard, but you're earning less and less. You're storing less and less value with any money you have saved away if it's in government money. Bitcoin is an exit from that as well. So it's like, yeah, there was a centralized platform that controlled my speech, and I discovered I could talk and do all these things, and the words didn't keep changing meaning while I was using them. Bitcoin is saying, hey, I've got this valuable thing. I can swap it for your time or your good or your service or whatever. And it's a reliable guy. And no one's going to hold on to this and no one's going to take a percentage of it except the miner. When you make the transaction, whoever mines the next block is going to get the fee. But fair enough. There's no free lunch. In Bitcoin, you have to maintain the security of the network, and that's done by people mining blocks. I'm not going to get into mining now, but Bitcoin transactions aren't free, suffice it to say that. If they were free, they'd be provided by a benevolent dictator who'd be deciding what transactions were okay and what transactions weren't. Fuck that. That's what Ethereum does. That's what those transactions aren't free either, by the way, but Ethereum is your benevolent dictator. That's Vitalik. They're deciding what apps are good and what apps are bad, and if they don't like your app, then it's not running on Ethereum anymore. There's no freedom there. You're back in another system. He's the Mark Zuckerberg of cryptocurrency. He's made a centralized platform and he likes to control what goes on and off in it. And again, it's an insult to Bitcoin to compare these two. When you buy Bitcoin and then you start talking to me about Ethereum, you don't understand the first thing about Bitcoin and what it offers you, because none of these other platforms do. I'm going to stop this video there, and thanks so much for watching, and I'm sorry about the interruptions. Have a great time. Please contact me if you have any questions, and I always appreciate comments and feedback, and please help the YouTube channel out a bit. I mean, as much as I don't like the platform, this is a public platform. I would always encourage you to use YouTube in a way where Google don't get any of your data for you having done so. If you do that, you can use services like NewPipe, and you can make sure you use a VPN and aren't signed in, and it's not complicated to do at all, and it actually gives you all the features that YouTube makes you pay for, like being able to minimize on your phone and being able to play the audio only and being able to download it, and all of those features are there as an open source app, and Google are denied from getting your IP address and forming a profile about what kind of videos you like to watch and what time you watch them at, and how long you spend on your average video, and every reason to do that. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you have, and have a good day or night. Goodbye.